the millionaire CEO's daughter, couldn't walk for years. Then a poor farmer whispered, "Let me try," and changed everything. She tried her best, and then she collapsed. A father's voice choked with grief. "I have the whole world, but I can't give my daughter the legs to stand up again." Lucas Thorne paused mid-swing. The axe in his hand hung in the air just above the log before he gently let it drop to his side. His eyes darkened as the name echoed through the rustling leaves of his quiet farm. "Ava," he whispered. Out here, surrounded by the scent of cedar and the low hum of cicadas, Lucas had carved out a silent life away from the world he once knew. Years ago, he had been a rising star in neurology, the youngest researcher ever to win the National Award for Innovation in Reflex Neurotherapy. His work in tactile neural stimulation was being reviewed for national funding. But brilliance could not save a life. Not his sister's. One surgery. One irreversible mistake. Her last breath had not only ended her life, but shattered his. He dropped out, vanished, and turned his back on everything. Only one person still knew who Lucas Thorne had once been: Maria Kendall, the nurse who had shared anatomy textbooks with him a decade ago and now stood beside Ava Sinclair's hospital bed every day. She had seen the girl's spirit wither under the sterile weight of broken promises from the best doctors in the country. She had also seen, not long ago, Lucas help a limping farm boy walk unsteadily across a hayfield with nothing but wooden braces he had whittled by hand. Maria had not said much, just enough to give a grieving father a final sliver of hope. She knew better than anyone. Lucas did not heal with machines or medicine. He healed with silence, patience, and his hands. Jonathan Sinclair, CEO of one of the largest financial institutions in the state, had not slept in weeks. He had read Ava's files over and over. 4 neurologists, 6 months of intensive therapy. Nothing, just whispers now, whispers that she would never walk again. But a whisper from Maria changed something inside him. So, one misty morning, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up the long gravel road to Lucas's farm. The tires crunched slowly, almost uncertainly, until the car came to a stop near a stack of firewood. The door opened, and Jonathan stepped out, looking wildly out of place in his tailored suit and polished shoes. Lucas, shirt soaked with sweat, hands rough and calloused, said nothing as the man approached. In Jonathan's trembling hands was a thick envelope. "I do not need a doctor," the CEO said softly, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "I need someone who can believe when others walk away." Lucas took the envelope, hesitated, then handed it back. "I am not a doctor," he said, wiping sawdust from his palms. "I know," Jonathan replied, not budging. "But you helped a boy no one believed in. You saw something the rest of us missed." Lucas looked away. "That was different." "Is it?" Jonathan opened the envelope and pulled out a single photograph. He held it out, not pleading but quietly, like a man placing the last piece of a shattered heart into another man's hand. The photo was of a young girl, blonde, bright-eyed, standing on a rocky ledge, laughing into the wind. She wore a red scarf, arms wide like wings. Her eyes were fierce with life. Lucas stared at the image for a long time. He saw intelligence, strength, a girl who had tasted freedom and now lived behind locked knees and silent screams. He swallowed hard, his hand tightening around the worn leather strap of his tool pouch. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a breath. "Let me try." He looked up. The wind caught his hair, and for the first time in years, there was fire in his eyes. "I will try, not because I believe in miracles," he said, voice steadying, "but because I once was like her, lost everything, and the only reason I ever stood again was because someone chose to believe when I had given up." He turned, walking toward the barn where old tools and blocks of wood waited in the dim light. Behind him, Jonathan Sinclair stood frozen, watching the man who had just become his daughter's last chance disappear into the golden morning haze. The Sinclair estate loomed like a marble fortress, gorgeous, immaculate, and completely devoid of warmth. Lucas stepped out of the modest pickup truck and stood for a moment at the iron gates, taking in the sprawling mansion. It was a place built to impress, not to heal. A nurse greeted him at the door. Her voice was soft, eyes shadowed with fatigue. "She knows you're coming. She does not want to see anyone." Lucas nodded once. He said nothing as he followed her through glittering hallways filled with silence. Expensive art lined the walls. Every surface sparkled. And yet there was a hollow weight to it all. Luxury without life. They stopped outside a heavy door. The nurse hesitated. "She has not spoken in 3 months. Not to me, not to the doctors, not even her father." Lucas glanced at the door. "I am not here to force anything." He turned the knob gently, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside. The room was filled with light, but felt utterly still. Ava sat in a high-backed wheelchair by the window, her face half turned away, a blanket wrapped around her legs. Her golden hair had dulled, and her shoulders slumped like someone who had forgotten how to carry their own weight. She did not look at him. Lucas didn't speak. He simply walked to the small table beside her bed, reached into his satchel, and placed a small block of smooth cedar and a slender whittling knife upon the polished wood. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out. Later that evening, Ava stared at the block of wood. She touched the knife briefly, then pulled her hand away. "I do not need toys," she muttered, more to the empty room than anyone in particular. The next morning the block and knife were still there. She had not thrown them away. Outside, Lucas worked in the garden behind the estate, his hands moving slowly over a piece of driftwood. He carved simple shapes, waves, trees, feathers, each line deliberate, meditative. He never looked toward the window, but Ava watched. From the shadows of her room, she watched him work every morning and into the early evening, never speaking, never acknowledging him. But something in his stillness unsettled her. Days passed. She began writing on scraps of paper, brief, tentative questions. Why do you carve? What is the point? She would leave them on the table when the nurse was not looking. Lucas never replied with words. Instead, he left small drawings in response. One day he left a carving of a hand reaching through tangled roots. Another day a single bird perched on a broken branch. Each image answered more than any explanation could. He should say something? No, this was real. It annoyed her at first, his quiet, his patience, but it also pulled at something she had buried deep, curiosity. Then, one night, the stillness broke. Ava's chest tightened suddenly, violently. Her muscles tensed and twisted without warning. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. The nurse rushed in, fumbling with her phone, yelling for help, but Ava could not hear her. The room spun, her vision blurred. Then a firm, steady hand gripped hers. "Look at me," Lucas said, crouched beside her chair, voice low but urgent. "Breathe. In. 1, 2, 3. Out. 4, 5. Ava's wide eyes met his, terrified. But she followed. She had no choice. His voice, rhythmic and soft, cut through the chaos like a thread, pulling her back. Her body slowly calmed, spasms easing. She slumped forward, exhausted, trembling. For a moment, she rested her head on his shoulder. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely audible. How did you know what to do?" Lucas was silent for a beat. Then quietly he replied, "My sister used to get episodes like that. Before she passed." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Ava did not respond, but her hand remained in his for just a moment longer before she pulled away. That night, when she was alone again, she picked up the cedar block. She held it for a long time, then she placed it gently in her lap. And for the first time in months, she felt something stir, not in her legs, but in her mind. A memory, a possibility, something more than pain, something like breath. There were no hospital beds, no beeping machines, no polished floors. Lucas's therapy began not with charts, but with the earth. Each morning he brought Ava into the garden behind the estate. The air smelled of grass and damp soil. Her bare feet touched wet grass. Her hands trailed through warm sand. He placed acorns in her palms, leaves against her cheeks, and led her fingers across the rough bark of the oak tree. "This is not about walking," he'd told her once. "It's about remembering that you still feel." Ava's body moved reluctantly. Her hands were weak, her legs numb. But slowly, her senses reawakened. She closed her eyes to feel the sun on her skin. She inhaled the scent of cedar. She even laughed softly when Lucas dropped a worm into her hand and it squirmed across her palm. Under the oak tree, they practiced basic motions. Lucas helped her close her fingers around a stone, then open them. Again and again, simple yet exhausting. One day, Lucas handed her a smooth piece of wood and a small carving knife. "It doesn't have to be perfect," he said. "It just has to be yours." "I've never done this," she said. He smiled. "That makes it better." Her grip was shaky, but she tried. Slowly she carved the shape of a leaf. Each line took minutes. Near the end, her hand slipped. The blade cut too deep, splitting the leaf down the center. She stared at it. "Of course," she muttered bitterly. "I ruin everything." Angrily, she threw it down. Lucas picked it up. He ran his thumb along the crack and looked at her with calm eyes. "Cracked wood isn't broken wood," he said. He sat beside her, pulled out his knife, and began carving. From the crack, he shaped a trunk, then branches. From one of them, a flower. "It grew from where it broke," he said, handing it back. Ava held it close. The crack was still there, but now it was part of something living. "It'll still be something?" she asked. Lucas nodded. "Just like you." Her eyes filled with something new, wonder. From then on, carving became their ritual. They spoke little, but the silence between them grew rich. Ava began to notice tingles in her legs, faint, almost imagined. She hesitated before telling Lucas. "My toes. I felt something." He only nodded. "That's your body remembering." One afternoon, she paused while carving. "Why do you believe in me so much?" Lucas set down his blade. "My sister had a condition. She didn't survive surgery. I couldn't save her," he said quietly. "But before she died, she said, 'I know you didn't give up.' Sometimes that's what people need. Someone who doesn't walk away." Ava smiled. Small, hesitant, but real. The first in months. Then came the moment. Lucas was pouring tea when he heard a sharp breath. He turned to see Ava frozen, eyes wide. "Lucas," she whispered. He rushed over. She pointed to her foot, tears slipping down her face. "My toe, it moved." They both stared, breath held. The second toe on her right foot twitched, just once, but it moved. "I did that," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It was me." Then she broke, laughing, crying, trembling. "You're the first person who didn't look at me like I was already gone." Lucas took her hand, eyes full. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Because in the smallest motion there was something greater than healing. There was hope. The sun filtered through the leaves like scattered gold as Ava rolled her wheelchair across the soft grass. Lucas waited by the old tree, just as he did each morning, a wooden walking frame beside him, handcrafted with soft padding and smooth edges, molded by hours of care. "Ready?" he asked. Ava nodded. With effort, she placed her hands on the sides of the frame. Her arms shook, her breath caught, but she pulled herself up. Her feet felt like anchors, heavy and reluctant. Yet slowly, inch by inch, she stood. Her body trembled, but the ground felt real beneath her. Every day, she repeated the ritual. Lucas never pushed. He simply stood nearby, silent, a steady presence. And each day, the seconds standing grew longer. Her muscles began to whisper instead of scream. Her balance learned to trust itself again. When she wasn't practicing, Ava painted. Her right hand still lacked control, so she used her left. The brush strokes were clumsy, but her heart guided them. She painted small moments, sunlight on leaves, the curve of a smile, the silhouette of a tree at dusk. And she began writing again. Her journal, long abandoned, filled slowly with shaky letters and uneven lines. Today I stood for 7 seconds. Lucas said nothing, but I saw the pride in his eyes. I felt the wind on my face. I didn't feel broken. Bit by bit, she let herself speak, in fragments at first, then in stories. One afternoon, under the shade of the oak tree, Ava held a piece of bark in her lap, her fingers running along its edge. "My mother used to bring me here," she said softly. "This was her favorite spot in the garden. She'd sit with a book while I danced around in the grass." Lucas looked at her, not with pity, but with quiet acknowledgement. "She died last year. Stroke, sudden. We didn't even say goodbye." She inhaled sharply. "After that, it all fell apart. I felt like I was carrying her grief and mine, and when the accident happened, I think a part of me believed I deserved it." Lucas did not respond with philosophy. He simply handed her a piece of wood and began carving beside her. Their tools made soft clicks in the silence. That silence, Ava realized, was safety. She was no longer alone in her grief. Later that week, Ava asked to be taken to the corner of the garden where her mother was buried. It was the first time she had gone there since the funeral. She wheeled herself down the winding path, the wind lifting strands of her hair. Lucas stayed behind, watching from a respectful distance. Ava placed a tiny wooden carving of a flower at the foot of the gravestone. Her fingers trembled as she traced the engraved name. "I miss you," she whispered. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." The sky turned golden as the sun dipped low. She sat there for a long time, letting the silence settle around her like a blanket. Then, it was late afternoon. The light painted the trees in warm amber. Ava was practicing with the walking frame again, gripping 2 handcrafted wooden canes Lucas had given her. Her breaths were even, her gaze focused. And then, slowly, almost impossibly, she let go of the frame. Just her canes, just her body. 3 seconds. She stood for 3 full seconds. It might as well have been 3 hours. Unseen, Jonathan Sinclair had come around the corner, his phone in hand, half-heartedly answering a call. He froze when he saw her. The canes wobbled. Her knees shook, but she was standing. Her daughter, who doctors had written off, stood tall, spine straight, eyes fixed on the horizon. He dropped the phone. "Ava," he whispered. She turned slightly, startled. Then she smiled, weak, uncertain, but radiant. "I'm getting stronger," she said. He took a hesitant step forward. His voice cracked. "You're standing," she nodded, "for 3 seconds." He covered his mouth with his hand, eyes welling. The man who had built an empire, who had faced boardrooms and political storms without blinking, now stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. "You're blooming," he whispered. Ava let out a laugh, breathless but proud. "I think," she said, "I finally believe I can." It started with a whisper, a private moment that should have remained in the golden quiet of the Sinclair garden. Ava had taken 3 full steps, assisted by the wooden frame Lucas built by hand. The sun lit her face as she trembled with determination, her brow furrowed, her jaw clenched. Unbeknownst to them, someone nearby had recorded it. Within 24 hours, the clip was everywhere. "Ava Sinclair walks again," read the caption. "After years in a wheelchair, a farmer helps her defy the odds." The footage spread like wildfire across social media. Shares, likes, comments by the thousands. A real-life miracle, a second chance. Who is the man behind the recovery? Major news outlets picked it up next. Headlines screamed. A wooden frame and a whisper. How a recluse farmer restored hope to a millionaire's daughter. Can woodworking heal the spine? The hands that touch the soul before the body. Reporters camped outside the Sinclair estate. Producers offered Lucas money to appear on talk shows. A prestigious medical organization invited him to speak at an international symposium on alternative therapies. He declined them all. "I did not heal anyone," he told a persistent journalist. "I helped a young woman believe in her hands again." But the simplicity of his words only ignited more frenzy. People wanted explanations, science, proof. The backlash came fast. Dr. Leonard Reyes, a top neurologist from Johns Hopkins, published a scathing opinion piece. "Emotion is not a treatment. Romanticizing unverified methods creates false hope. The line between compassion and recklessness must not be blurred." A primetime news special asked pointedly, "Is Lucas Thorne a hidden genius or a master manipulator in a clever PR stunt?" The pressure fell squarely on the Sinclair family. Meetings grew tense. Lawyers hovered. The family's PR team warned of potential lawsuits, licensing issues, and ethical concerns. Ava was being discussed like a brand, like liability. In one particularly quiet, heavy meeting in the drawing room, Jonathan Sinclair stood facing Lucas. "We are surrounded," he said, voice tight. "Media, lawyers, doctors. This is no longer just about Ava. I cannot risk letting her become a symbol in a war against modern medicine." Lucas said nothing. He nodded once, slowly, respectfully. From the hallway, Ava listened. She had not meant to eavesdrop, but when she heard her name spoken like a problem to solve, something inside her cracked. Later that evening, eyes burning, she rolled into her father's study. "You're letting them decide again," she said, her voice trembling. "Just like after the accident. You never asked me what I wanted. Not then, not now." He looked at her, heart breaking. "Ava." She wheeled away before he could finish. A press conference was scheduled days later. The Sinclair family hoped it would quell the storm. It was held at the city's medical center, packed with reporters, flashing lights, and skeptical professionals. Lucas sat in the back row, head bowed, hands folded. His face was calm but tired, alone among a sea of suits and skepticism. Jonathan stepped to the podium. "I want to thank you all for coming," he began. "This journey has been unexpected." Before he could continue, a reporter stood up. "Mr. Thorne," the woman asked sharply, "you have no medical license, no formal therapeutic certification. You worked with a minor without medical oversight. Do you realize the implications?" Silence filled the room. Lucas did not respond. Another reporter chimed in, voice harsher. "Are you selling a dream without science, Mr. Thorne?" Lucas lifted his gaze slightly, not angry, just steady. Before he could speak, the doors at the back of the hall flew open. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Ava Sinclair rolled down the aisle, her wheels cutting a path through the tension. She did not stop until she reached the stage. "Stop," she said. The room fell utterly silent. She turned to the crowd, her voice clear, eyes burning with clarity. "That man," she pointed, "did not ask to treat me. I asked him. Not because I wanted to be healed, but because I needed someone to see me. Not as a case, not as a statistic. As a person." She paused, her voice shaking with emotion. When every doctor told me what I could not do, he asked me one thing: "Do you want to keep going?" That question saved my life. No one moved, no one spoke. Then, slowly, her father stood. His eyes filled with tears he no longer cared to hide. And he began to clap. One by one, others joined. Cameras were lowered. Pens stopped scribbling. It was no longer about headlines or controversies. It was about a girl who had found her voice, and a man who had never needed to raise his to change everything. Lucas met Ava's gaze from across the room. In that look was everything: gratitude, pride, and something far deeper, a truth that needed no defense. The silence returned, but this time it hurt. After the press conference, the world buzzed louder than ever. Opinions, invitations, criticism. It never stopped. Lucas, never one to chase attention, felt the weight of it all, not for himself, but for Ava. Her name was now caught in a storm that had nothing to do with her healing, and it terrified him. So he packed his tools. No ceremony, no goodbyes. Just a quiet morning, a folded letter on her windowsill, and a walk down the gravel path away from the estate. When Ava woke up, he was gone. She didn't cry. Not at first. She simply stared at the oak tree where he used to wait with her every morning. The garden, once a sanctuary, now felt like an empty room. She stopped eating, stopped speaking again. Her father watched helplessly as the light began to fade from her eyes. At night she tossed and turned. The house felt colder, bigger, emptier. One morning she wheeled herself to the workshop where Lucas used to carve. Dust had begun to settle, but the shelf, his shelf, was still lined with tiny wooden pieces, shapes he had made and left behind. She touched each one: a tiny bird, a spiral, a cracked heart stitched back together, and then a small block of pine. On it, in Lucas's careful carving, were 5 simple words: "Every scar is a seed." Her breath caught. Hands trembling, she took the block to her room and set it on the windowsill. Then, without calling anyone, without asking for help, she pulled herself from bed, slid her feet into her braces, gripped her walking frame, and made her way to the back garden. Step by step, slow and stubborn, she moved across the grass until her legs gave out. She collapsed. Her palms scraped against the stone path. Her knees buckled. The pain shot up her spine. She bit her lip to keep from screaming. Footsteps rushed toward her. It was her father. He dropped to the ground beside her, panic in his eyes. "I'm fine," she whispered, trying to push him away. "Haven." "No," she said, voice breaking. "You do not get to speak for me. Not this time." He froze. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose him, Dad. I don't want to lose the only person who ever saw me as more than a girl in a chair." Her father's hands shook as he helped her sit upright. "Then we will bring him back." A few days later, a new sign appeared at the gate of the Sinclair estate. Not in polished brass, not engraved in glass. It was wood, raw, simple. Carved into it were the words, "I still need my farmer." Lucas saw it before he saw anything else. He had been living on the edge of town again, in a small cabin near the woods, working quietly, avoiding screens, avoiding headlines, avoiding hope. But that sign, crooked, imperfect, beautiful, stopped him in his tracks. He stood at the gate for a long time before it opened. And Ava was there. She was standing, not perfectly, not steadily, but standing. Her hands gripped the wooden canes he had made. Her legs quivered beneath her, but her eyes held. She smiled, and it was full and true. "You forgot to finish a piece," she said, nodding toward the sign. Lucas stepped closer. She reached out, her hand finding his. "It was never about healing," she whispered. "It was about learning how to live again. He pulled her into a careful embrace, arms steadying her trembling frame. And for the first time in a long time, Ava felt completely whole. Not fixed, not cured, but alive. The world had moved on, but Ava had just begun. Each morning she woke before the sun, stretching limbs that still ached but no longer felt foreign. She walked, slowly, carefully, with her wooden frame along the garden path. The cane tips tapped rhythmically against the stones, a steady beat of determination. Then came the sound of laughter. Children in mismatched chairs and walkers gathered in a sunny corner of the Sinclair garden. Ava knelt beside them, sometimes still trembling, sometimes needing help, but always smiling. Her workshop, once a space of silence and healing, had transformed into something louder, warmer, a classroom. Ava taught them to carve, not perfectly, but meaningfully. "Not every line has to be straight," she told a boy missing 3 fingers. "Every cut tells a story." Lucas watched from a distance sometimes, hands folded, face soft. He spent most of his days across town now, where he had partnered with a small rehabilitation hospital to build something he had once only dreamed of, a sensory garden made of wood, stone, and soil. No machines, no high-tech programs. Just benches carved with purpose, paths designed to be walked barefoot, wooden railings shaped to feel like branches, a place where patients could reconnect, not just with therapy, but with their senses, with the earth, with themselves. They called it the Grove. At night, Lucas would return to the Sinclair estate, where he and Ava lived in the old gardener's cottage, cozy, quiet, filled with books, carvings, and unfinished cups of tea. They would sit outside on the porch, fireflies flickering through the hedges. One evening, as the sky turned navy and the wind whispered low through the trees, Ava leaned her head gently on his shoulder. She was quiet for a while. Then, voice barely audible, she said, "No one believed I would walk again." Lucas's arm tightened slightly around her. He did not need to speak. Ava turned her face toward him, tears shining. "Except you." He looked down at her, his voice rough with feeling. "It was not that I believed in you," he whispered. "It was that I saw something. Even you were too scared to look at." Ava closed her eyes. There were no reporters now, no cameras, no debates, just the sound of the wind and the hum of crickets. Just a girl who once thought her story had ended, and the man who had helped her turn the page. And in the quiet glow of the evening, the ordinary became a kind of miracle. 1 year later, the garden looked different, but only because Ava now walked through it. She no longer needed the frame. Not always. Her steps were slow, a little uneven, but they were hers. Each one carried the weight of 1,000 before it, the weight of doubt, pain, and perseverance. And every time her foot touched the ground, it was a quiet victory. She had moved into a small wooden house beside Lucas's workshop, a place filled with the scent of cedar and the gentle hum of chisels on wood. There she created frames, small sculptures, carved tokens she gave to the children in her classes. Her hands, once weak and uncertain, had grown strong with purpose. It was a warm spring day when the Sinclair family gathered for a picnic under the old oak tree, the same spot where Ava had once fallen. Once cried, once stood for the first time on shaking legs. The garden was in full bloom, laughter drifting between the flower beds. Ava wore a simple dress, her hair tied back with a red scarf, the same one she had worn in that photo Lucas first saw. Her father sat beneath the tree, watching her with the kind of peace he had not known in years. Lucas was tending the grill, his hands moving with practiced calm. Nearby, his young niece Ella played with wildflowers, twirling in the sunlight. Then, suddenly, she skipped over to Ava, holding something in her small hand. "Uncle Lucas said to give you this," Ella said, smiling wide. She opened her palm. It was a ring, delicate, carved from polished bark, wrapped with a tiny silver thread. Inside, burned into the wood, were the words, "Hope grows here." Ava blinked, lips parting in surprise. Before she could speak, Lucas walked over and knelt in front of her on one knee. "I did not make that to heal you," he said, voice rough with emotion, "because you were never broken." He reached for her hand, his eyes locked with hers. "You are not what I fixed. You are what brought me back to life. Will you marry me, Ava?" Her breath caught. Then, through tears and laughter, she nodded. "You are not late," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You came just in time to walk the rest of this path with me." Behind them, Jonathan Sinclair stood with a glass of lemonade in hand, eyes glistening. He looked up at the sky with a soft smile. "She found someone who truly sees her," he murmured, as if speaking to the breeze. "You can rest easy now, love. Our girl's going to be just fine." And in the golden glow of the afternoon sun, surrounded by laughter, wood shavings, and wildflowers, a chapter closed, not with the sound of applause, but with the quiet beat of two hearts choosing each other. One step at a time. In a world that often rushes past the quiet miracles, sometimes all it takes is one whisper, one hand reaching through the darkness, one person who chooses to believe when everyone else walks away. Ava didn't just learn to walk again, she learned to live, to love, and to rise from the ashes of her own fear. And Lucas, he didn't just help her heal, he found the missing pieces of himself in the process. Because healing doesn't always come in hospitals. Sometimes it grows in gardens, in carved wood, in shared silence, and in the brave decision to try one more time. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that resilience can be quiet and love can be carved by hand, here we bring you tales that don't just entertain. They heal, they inspire, and they stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Until next time, keep believing in the beauty of second chances. Subscribe now and let your soul be